The Bodhisattvas will and strive for the non-arising of bad and unwholesome states that have not yet arisen. They initiate vigorous effort, commanding the mind and directing it properly. They will and strive for the destruction of bad and unwholesome states that have arisen, initiating vigorous effort, commanding the mind and directing it properly. They will and strive for the arising of good states that have not yet arisen, initiating vigorous effort, commanding the mind and directing it properly. They will and strive for the stabilization, prevention of loss, augmentation, increased production and cultivation, and complete fulfillment of good states that have already arisen, initiating vigorous effort, commanding the mind and directing it properly. So, we began this awakening period with the question about trustworthiness, about being worthy of trust, worthy of offerings, worthy of reverence, and such. And so it is appropriate that we end these exhortations with this section. Friends, this is right effort. The Eightfold Path of Buddhism, beginning with right view, and then taking place in a number of different ways, but we'll take the most common order now, although it isn't by any means the only order. Right ought, right thought, right intention, the right sense of what you should do with your life. Right dream, you might call it. In the way that we have here, I suppose, we have something called the American dream. So the thing that the word dream means there is what this word sankalpa means in Samyak Sankalpa. We have we begin with right view, a sense of how things are. And how are things? Well, most important, things matter. There is this world, and there is the other world. And there is fruit of action, skillful and unskillful. There is love, and there are consequences of that. What you do makes a difference. Has an impact. And there are ethical consequences of actions now and in the future, even after the breakup of the body. And we have an appropriate sense of how to live as a result of accepting that that's how things are. Obviously, we don't yet know that that's how things are. We take it on faith. We have to make our way through this, you could call it, experiment of the Eightfold Path in order to confirm, verify, or of course disprove that this right view is correct. The beginning of it is, what should I do with my life? And, well, I should be kind. That's what I should do with my life. That's it. I shouldn't be selfish. Should be considerate, compassionate. with the understanding that I have the ability to do so. And then our speech comes into accord with that, our action comes into accord with that, our livelihood comes into accord with that. And because of that hard work, we can experience this section on right effort very powerfully. But obviously, it doesn't end there. Right effort leads to right mindfulness, samyak smriti, and then samyak samadhi, right rapture, perhaps you'd call it, or concentration. Now, of course, this right effort applies. There isn't just this one order. On the contrary, right effort is relevant to the other aspects of this path. And this right effort is what I've been calling work. A work is a word that I don't like, but in our culture, where we work the most that anyone ever has, on average, for a civilization, it seems to be a useful word. Perhaps we'll break that word, move beyond it. For now, we're calling it work, the work that we have come here to do, like a carpenter. Their work is carpentry. A cook, their work is cooking. Here, this is our work. The bodhisattvas will and strive for the non-arising of bad and unwholesome states that have not yet arisen. They initiate vigorous effort, commanding the mind and directing it properly. Yes. So this is of course, is a tetralemma. Good and bad, or you could say wholesome and unwholesome, kushala and akushala states, and also that have arisen and that have not arisen. So there are four possibilities, and in each of them there is a kind of willing and striving in which we initiate vigorous effort and command the mind, directing it properly. So in this case, it is regarding unwholesome states that have not yet arisen. We will and strive, we work hard to be sure that such states do not arise. Yes, we do that by paying attention to their causes and working to be sure that they don't bear fruit. Those causes may not come into being at all, or if they do, then we work with them, resolve them, so that these unwholesome states don't arise. They will and strive for the destruction of bad and unwholesome states that have arisen, initiating vigorous effort, commanding the mind and directing it properly. So in this case, we have unwholesome states that have arisen, and what do? We will and strive for their destruction, their end, their elimination. They will and strive for the arising of good states that have not yet arisen, initiating vigorous effort, commanding the mind and directing it properly. So now we have good, wholesome states that have not yet arisen. There are good states that are wholesome and beneficial, but they haven't yet arisen, and so we will and strive for their arising, coming into being. They will and strive for the stabilization, prevention of loss, augmentation, increased production, cultivation, and complete fulfillment of good states that have already arisen. So now we have good states that have arisen, good states that are present. We initiate vigorous effort, commanding the mind and directing it properly, in order to be sure that these good states are secured and brought to completion. So once again, we can pay attention to good and bad and to arising and non-arising, which is a good idea. Pay attention to that and come to know it, and that won't take you very long. Probably you're finished with that by now. But there's another part of the text which we often don't hear, incredibly enough. I find when I look at these texts, the way, when I'm trying to teach, I'm trying to be of service, which is difficult, at least for me, one of the helpful things to do is to read the text and see what things are repeated the most, because those are the things that people seem to be least likely to hear. And so the Buddha, like many teachers, find the things that people just don't hear and then repeat it and 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 repeat it. In hopes that maybe you say repeat it enough times, someone will hear you say repeat it. It's not easy. We're all at a loss here, not sure what to do. And so we're just doing our best. And what is the part that's repeated the most? Will, striving, vigor, effort, commanding, directing. And then, when we come to the final one about the good states that have arisen, stabilization, maintenance, prevention of loss, augmentation, increased production, cultivation, and complete fulfillment. Initiating vigorous effort, commanding the mind and directing it properly. This is an ought. This is a statement about what you should do, but it's based on an understanding of how things are. There's no need to make this philosophical. Just know that the claim made here is absolutely simple. And the claim is this: you can do it. The Buddha said that the most damaging, the most evil view held by Makali Kosala at the time of the Buddha, causing the most harm to living beings, is the view you're impotent. You can't do anything. There's no such thing as will. There's no such thing as effort. You can't have any impact on anything. And not just that you can't because you lack strength, but no, you actually can't. The way the world is a way that you cannot do that, for whatever reason. And there are lots of different reasons that different traditions have given. And the Buddha says there is nothing more harmful than this view. This paragraph is offering us freedom, power. The ability to move forward. And incredibly, even if we don't take it, we're still proving that it's true. Because we have chosen to not take it. We can confuse ourselves about this again and again in all kinds of ways. People have been confused about this for a long time. We didn't invent it. It receives a great deal of attention in the Buddhist texts, and it's been a general argument by philosophers in many directions for a long time. But this is about practice. And so, since so many of us have struggled so much with this topic of, shall we say, shame, let's just jump right into it, shall we? Let's just jump right in. Let's take a look. So, long time ago, there were two people who lived in a wonderful place, which the town next door is named after. In a wonderful, perfect place called Eden. And in Eden they were free. They could do what they wanted. And all was good. All was healthy. But God, who would often walk through the garden, told them, do not eat of this tree. You can eat everything else here, but don't eat of this tree. This is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Don't do it. Don't eat of this tree. But they ate of that tree. A serpent came and told them, God just doesn't want you to become like him. God wants you to remain lowly. But if you eat of that tree, then you'll be like a god. So you should eat of it. And they did. And what happened next? The first thing, as it is recorded, they became ashamed. They became ashamed, and they decided to cover themselves up. And when God came walking through the garden, he called to them, but they hid themselves from God. And he realized that they had eaten of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And so he cursed them to pain and to work. These are the things: pain and work. And he cast them out of the garden. Now, this story, of course, is quite famous. And many people in many traditions have interpreted it in many ways. So, now you receive a certain interpretation of this story. And I'll put this to you in very tangible terms that are relevant, highly relevant to your lives. And that is this: as far as I can tell, when I look at the world, unfortunately, human beings seem to become increasingly insane the more they understand. Which means that most of us fall into either being, you could say, informed, knowledgeable, and insane, or ignorant and sane. It's very difficult for human beings to have knowledge without going insane. In particular, the knowledge of good and evil. It's very difficult for us. As I've said again and again, it's our job to go straight into the place where human beings are most confused and function with wisdom, function clearly. And what is this place? Well, knowledge, intelligence, information, understanding, conceptualization, intellect, mental understanding, and in particular, goodness gracious, if we start trying to understand good and evil in those terms, that you could say is a hopeless case. When I say it's a hopeless case, what does it mean? It means that these are the people who are living in hell, who cannot be helped under any circumstances. And yet we have vowed to be of service even to people who have a mental understanding of good and evil, the most hopeless cases, who do the most harm in all the world. Because this is impotent in this realm, and so we come to the conclusion that nothing matters. We become nihilistic and falter at this moment of need. It's our job to step into that situation, to know how to skillfully navigate thinking, conceptualization, good, evil. We do this by seeing that it couldn't be that this sin, this missing of the mark, this mistake, this slip, as the Muslims call it, this slip up, we slipped, we sinned, we missed the point. It couldn't be that, based on a choice we made, could impact our inherent nature. That's ridiculous. An inherent nature can't be caused by something. It's uncaused, unproliferated, unconditioned. So nothing you do could change it. Nothing anyone does can change it. If it can change, then it's not your inherent nature. And yet, choices have consequences. Choices have consequences. And when we choose to eat of this tree of knowledge of good and evil, and naturally we then have to do our work. We have to do the work needed then to deal with that, to deal with the consequences of that initial error. Which is a perfectly good translation of original sin. But when you say original, then it indicates that it is your origin. But it isn't your origin. It's just the first mistake you made. The first mistake. Attempting to procure the knowledge of good and evil. Hoping that that is what will sustain us. That is what will nourish us. The work that we do is written right here. We've taken this on. We decided we wanted to be gods. Okay, you want to be God? Well, there's some work to do. There's a lot of wisdom that you're going to need to acquire. There's a lot of love that you're going to need to cultivate. It's going to be hard work. And that is what we're here to do. We sit down and we will and strive for the non-arising of bad and unwholesome states that have not yet arisen, initiating vigorous effort, commanding the mind and directing it properly. Please try to hear what this is saying. I know it's hard words and it was translated and now it's clunky. It's annoying. Well, hear it. Try to hear. People who are writing this are they're trying to say something to you. Try to help them to say it to you. Try to be on board with it. This is why a major reason that in a lot of cultures, listening is taken more seriously than speaking. Listening is taken to be a harder skill than speaking. Oh, take that skill seriously here. What are these words talking about? In your own experience, what do they point at? They will and strive for the destruction of bad and unwholesome states that have arisen, initiating vigorous effort, commanding the mind and directing it properly. They will and strive for the arising of good states that have not yet arisen, initiating vigorous effort, commanding the mind and directing it properly. They will and strive for the stabilization, prevention of loss, augmentation, increased production and cultivation, and complete fulfillment of good states that have already arisen, initiating vigorous effort, commanding the mind and directing it properly. That is what we have come to do. And it is through doing that that we become trustworthy. It's through doing that that we become worthy of trust. It's not easy to be worthy of trust, but we all know so deeply and so truly that when people talk about it, we don't hear it because it's so precious in our hearts. We know how hard it is to be surrounded by people who we can't trust. We know how hard it is to be surrounded all the time by one person, ourselves, who we can't trust. It's terrible. We struggle with this our whole lives, and when we talk about trauma and pain and how hard life is now, this is what we mean. We have to do this work because human beings decided, I want to know. And now we know so much. We know more and more, and we keep on thinking if we just know more, then it will sustain us. Finally, this knowledge of good and evil will nourish us. We just have to eat more. Well, if you want to eat more in a way that will be helpful, this is how you do it. Not by mere mental understanding, but find out how exactly to do this work. It seems to me now, as I teach and as I interact with this modern practice, that, that this point, vigorous effort, will, striving, commanding the mind, directing it properly, this is the part that people don't want to do. And I understand to a large extent why. It's because we do a lot of work nowadays. We work so hard. We got kicked out of the garden a long time ago, and the work just keeps on getting harder. I mean, it was bad originally, don't get me wrong. Farming, it was terrible. We went from being the healthiest we've ever been. As hunter-gatherers, that was the healthiest human beings have ever been, including now, incredibly enough. Of course, we died of things young, but in terms of nutrition, we were doing great. To becoming farmers. And then almost everybody was malnourished and injured. It was awful. And then we kept going till nowadays. We have a lot of food, I suppose. But we're more stressed than ever. We're anxious. We're depressed. All kinds of maladies. Suicide, eating disorders, loneliness. and other problems that are virtually unknown or literally unknown in traditional communities are common now. And beyond that, we don't think that there's anything we can do about it. And we continually hope that something outside of ourselves will help, like a pill of some kind. Which isn't to say anything about the pill itself, a pill for depression or something. It's not about that. It's about where do we go automatically? Do we go to meditation and exercise and community automatically as a solution to these problems? Or do we go to a place that has no work associated with it? Or very little, taking medication. It's not about the medication itself, and it's not about the exercise itself. It's like, I'm not really talking about jogging right now. I'm talking about a way of looking at things. How do we approach life? And when I look at people who approach this life nowadays, part of it is that there is so much work that we don't want more work. And I'm suggesting, good, don't want more work. Change the kind of work you do. Do different work. And then you say, but how? And the answer is exactly the way we do it here. I mean, the answer has just been laid out. Get exercise, meditate, be in a community. Will and strive for the non-arising of bad and unwholesome states that have not yet arisen. There it is. That's what you do. Will and strive for the destruction of bad and unwholesome states that have arisen. Will and strive for the arising of good states that have not yet arisen. Will and strive for the stabilization and complete fulfillment of good states that have already arisen. That's the work. That's how you do it. That's how it's done. But when I see the modern way, it's as if people say, well, but wait, the Eightfold Path, obviously an error, and especially of all of the sections. Now, I actually used to say that right livelihood was the one that people hate the most. But I'd say that that's a close second. I think this one is the one people hate the most. Right effort. People do not want to make effort. On the contrary, we want enlightenment with as little effort as possible, as little will as possible, as little striving as possible, as little vigor as possible. That seems to be what we want. An entire industry has arisen around this. And what I want to say is that this is tragic. Because it's exactly through this will and effort skillfully engaged in that this underlying shame is assuaged and then in fact broken. Enlightenment isn't that, as Peter says, that you can just come to a place and say, make me enlightened. That's exactly what we want. We want to just go to a place, get into a machine, or take a pill or something, and have that thing make us enlightened. It seems like that would be a really good way to do this. That would be a terrible way for this to happen. Because this will, this effort, means that you are empowered. This is very hard for me to get across. It's repeated again and again here. Maybe I'm not the first one. This will, this effort, this just doing. Without that, then even if you have some kind of enlightenment, what's the meaning in it? It's not alive. For me, I'm just going to talk about myself for a second because this is so hard to get across. So I was very confused about what's wrong with people. I saw when I was a teenager, I was very concerned that people are so evil. And didn't know what to do about it, and so I decided to try meditation. And so when I was a freshman early on in the year, I went to the meditation club, or whatever they called it, and sat down, and Sumi told me, follow your breath and do some other things. And I sat there for 20 minutes, which was a very long time. An impossibly long time. And I did the thing she said. I just did it and did it and did it and did it and did it. And I started doing it. I started focusing on my breath and the other stuff she said. And right away, things got bad. Right away, I felt worse than I did when I got there. And so the solution was, do the things she said. Focus on the breath and such. And right away, things got worse. It says, yes, we already read it. The Buddha said that this is immediately effective. Well, it was. It was immediately effective. And so I decided, okay, only one thing to do here. I came here to meditate. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to do the meditation. So I did. And it got worse. And a minute in, I don't know how I got through that minute. And so it got worse. And after the second minute, it was much worse than the first. And after the 10th minute, it was worse than the 9th. And then after 20 minutes, they rang the bell. And it was worse than it was when I started. It was worse. It was the worst moment of the whole thing. The whole time, I just did the thing she said. And it was awful. And I looked around the room, and everybody had that smile that spiritual people have. And I realized this is not for me. And I didn't want to talk to them. They were going to then have a Dharma discussion or something. And I was not going to engage with these people. And so I jumped up and I ran out of the room. And as I ran out, the thought occurred to me, what is wrong with these people? I was angry with them. I was ashamed. Even though the thought was, what's wrong with them? We all know that the real concern was, what's wrong with me? They did what I did and they're happy. There must be something really wrong with me. There must be something so terrible inside of me. It could never be fixed. Because she didn't tell me to do anything that bad. She just said, follow your breath, count and such. I mean, if that causes this much suffering, there must be something wrong with me. And so in a confused daze, I walked back to my dorm, which fortunately was quite far away. Other side of campus. I walked slowly because I was confused. I didn't know what had just happened to me. And the whole time I kept wondering what was wrong with them. But it was like I was dizzy. It was like everything was... It was at night, but it was even more like it was at night than night. That makes sense. If you imagine what it's like physically from day to night, imagine psychologically it goes from day to night. Everything was at night. And I got most of the way back. And by the side of the path, I saw a tree, a little tree, kind of like some of these out here. Just a little tree, 3-4 meters tall. And I stopped, because I had never seen a tree like that. This tree, it was like it was made of jewels. You see this in the text. They say trees made of jewels. I don't know what to tell you. It was as if it was made of jewels. It was sparkling and shining in that way. There was no light. It was nighttime. And it was still shining and sparkling. But that wasn't the amazing part. The amazing part was that that tree, its roots, its branches, extended through the whole universe. But actually, that wasn't the amazing part. The amazing part was that that tree was my mind. My mind was that tree. My mind was the universe. But that wasn't even the amazing part, and is not why I'm telling this story right now. The important part of the realization as I see it now, 25 years later, looking back on it now, after having, because of that experience, dropped out of college and gone to Japan, where the Roshi said, that isn't even the beginning of this path. I mean, that isn't even a glimpse. That's nothing. We're not even going to talk about it. You need to get started now. It's great you arrived. Well, learn how to meditate. And then years of the same thing again. Years of turmoil and torture of sitting. I did not enjoy one meditation session for 6 years of training. And then other experiences happen. And the Roshi again, no. One time I got so mad at him. I had an experience. I saw the sunlight. It was an amazing experience, and I went and told him about it, and he completely dismissed it. Just get out of here. And I was angry. I came back angry that he would. I actually went to his room at night after evening chanting to get mad at him for not accepting my experience. And he was so nice. He was so kind. He smiled and he said, "Okay, well, let's talk about tomorrow." So the next day in Sanzen, I talked to him, and he was so sweet. He said, "You have a beautiful mind. Even when a little drop of truth falls into it, the whole thing resonates." Isn't that a nice thing to say? Really, really, really skillfully done. No, really, it was really nice. And then on and on and on. And attempting to apply that to real situations, like around situations of injustice in the world. And then, here we are, right? Looking back on it now, the important part of the experience was realizing and consciously realizing that if it is the case that my mind is the whole universe, then the work I just did for that 20 minutes to purify my mind purified the entire universe. I can do that. I can will and strive. Initiating vigorous effort, commanding the mind, and through doing that, actually save the world directly. That we then live in a trustworthy way is the shadow of that. It's the natural consequence of having done that. And if we don't do that, then push come to shove, we're just out to get something. We're out to get some enlightenment experience, some big experience so that we can feel better. And the moment conditions change and we realize this isn't the best time for me to get a big experience so I can feel better, we'll turn away. But oftentimes that's exactly when people need us. We have to see this is the chance, right here. Right here, this is the chance to purify the mind. No matter what's happening, that isn't the point. This work right now is the point. And then the whole universe that we think is so real becomes secondary, not primary. And we finally understand mind is chief. Mind is the forerunner. Mind leads all things. If we speak or act with a corrupted thought, a corrupted mind, suffering follows. Just like the wheel follows the hoof of the ox that pulls the cart, of course. If we speak or act with a pure mind, happiness follows. Just like the shadow that never leaves. It's not heavy. We don't have to carry it around with us. It's there. But the metaphor is brilliant. The metaphors here it's too good. The hoof of the ox. So in Indian way of looking at things, the feet are dirty and bad. So you have that. That's because your mind is corrupted. The wheel, it does not end. The wheel of samsara just turns and turns and turns. And then this shadow that is not only completely light and effortless, but it is both actually a lack of something. You see? It's that which is not there. It's what's the happiness part. Rather than being something that you got and acquired, it's the lack of something. But beyond that, it's just a shadow. It's a shadow of this brilliant mind. Even the happiness is a shadow. Along with it being that in India, it's hot. And so shadows are good things because it's hot. So it's not like here we talk about shadow this and shadow that, it's bad things. There it's a wonderful thing. So we directly see that we are empowered, we have ability beyond acquisition. This stage, this aspect of the path of right effort, this is something that we must come to celebrate. That somehow, miraculously, incredibly, we can will and strive. This is not a bad thing. What greater miracle could you hope for? Somehow it is possible to will and strive to purify your mind and to purify the world, and we want to do away with that part of the path? We want to miss that part of the path? We can will and strive for the non-arising of bad and unwholesome states, initiating vigorous effort, commanding the mind. Commanding the mind? This is incredible. We want to do away with this. We get to sit down here and do it. Is that not miraculous? We can will and strive for the destruction of bad and unwholesome states. We can will and strive for the arising of good, wholesome states. We can will and strive for the stabilization, prevention of loss, augmentation, increased production, cultivation, and complete fulfillment of good, wholesome states that have already arisen. This is incredible. This isn't something to be avoided. This is something to celebrate. Not just in order to get something to happen. It's through this hard work. We do this work, and in that way, we work through this knowledge of good and evil. We actually work through it. We master it. We mature into it. We realize it. And yes, it is the case that we will come to the point of samadhi, going beyond even the knowledge of good and evil. And so when we look at this story, it's important to know that according to certain interpretations of this story, the shift that happened when they ate that apple, which is nice, actually, apple's a nicer fruit, actually. Let's call it an apple. When they ate that fruit, that apple, the shift that happened was, and this is according to certain interpretations, mostly in the Jewish tradition, that what happened was that the nature of evil, which is to say the seemingly natural inclination to evil, became mixed into their true nature. So their nature was good, but then when they ate it and were nourished by the knowledge of good and evil, the inclination toward evil was mixed in and couldn't be separated. Couldn't be separated out. And so we started interpreting ourselves as being inherently evil, and so we became ashamed and wanted to cover ourselves over with all of these ideas and self-images and attachments and acquisitions and philosophical positions and views, covering ourselves over so that no one can see what's really there, because we became convinced that what's really there is bad. And the work that we have to do in the spiritual path is the work of separating out the unwholesome states and the wholesome states. Because this evil has to feed on something. It has to feed. It's not inherent, so it has to feed. It feeds on this brilliant awareness. But we liberate ourselves from that and directly encounter that which does not feed, that which does not eat, that which is independent, that which is not conditionally arisen, that which is unsupported. This work is how we do it. In one moment, the work confirms that we have this power, and it does the stuff in the conditional world, though this power is inherent, there it is, and yet in the world of conditions, it makes us capable of becoming more trustworthy in the world so that people can trust us, because we know how painful it is when we're around people who we can't trust. It's really bad. I don't know what else to say. We accept it. And that is what was happening for me as I sat there, is accepting how bad it really is. So yes, it was immediately effective. There were a lot of bad and unwholesome states that I needed to face. It was time to face it. It's time to accept it. And to see that it's possible to apply work to purify it. That this can be done. But this isn't done by coming up with some idea about how we're going to get things to be, and then finally getting things to be that way. We do this by entering samadhi, becoming completely pure, and then the breakthrough occurs. The inconceivable breakthrough to the Dharma. Another story that many of you may know is often known as the story of Pandora's box. Very similar story, actually. So, I won't give the background to it now, but it's sort of similar. A god was interested in making trouble for people in this story, and so gave this jar to human beings through Pandora, and we opened it. And all kinds of evil came out of it and now plague us. But Pandora was somewhat mindful, you could say, and she closed the lid as fast as she could. Now, the stuff got out, all kinds of bad things. But she did keep one thing in there. Does anyone know what it was? Hope. That's right. Whew, that was a close one. Happily, she caught hope in there, so that at least that wouldn't plague us. Unfortunately, we each, if you look at each of these stories as talking about our spiritual path, we each have the ability to take hope out and infect ourselves with it. This expectation, hope. Is a curse. But we ourselves have to be the ones who engage it. It's a very interesting story. How is it that we realize that which is unsupported? That which is unconditioned, that which does not feed, that which is, you could say, inherent, if you want to put it that way. It's a problematic word, but it might feel good. But its meaning is somewhat problematic. But that which is unsupported, unknown, unpossessed, unacquired, unaccumulated, we do it by abandoning hope. Therefore, I say, abandon hope, ye who enter here. Abandon all hope, all of it. This place already doesn't support you. It's inherent. The unsupported, unconditioned doesn't have to be acquired. And how do you do it? Abandon hope and fear. Abandon it. This willing, striving, this vigorous effort isn't about hope and fear, coming up with the knowledge of good and evil, saying, I'm going to do it this way so that it'll be better. We, instead of that, use this effort to navigate that knowledge, to separate out good from evil so that we have mastered this mind. And then from there we can enter a unitive awareness of samadhi and break through this dualistic awareness entirely. So we do this, we work, will strive in this way to accept the fact that we can do this. That any shame is a result, not a cause. It's not about inherent nature. It's about conditional experience. And it has its own truth to it. It has its own validity to it. We see we haven't behaved in the best ways, but that itself proves our power. That there are consequences of our actions. There isn't a way for us to have this power without there being consequences of our actions. We have this power. We don't have to turn it into some kind of, what do they call it? Free will? Not a word in the West. Free will, right? Doesn't have to be some confusing philosophical issue. But he gets all excited about it for centuries. Doesn't have to be like that. It's about do this. Free will is a very confused concept. That's why everyone's so confused about it. So just for now, set that aside and do this. And we have this power. We can make effort. And in this way, we can become trustworthy. This becoming trustworthy is the magnificent power that is possible because of our inherent nature. That's already trustworthy. It couldn't be untrustworthy because it's not supported, and it doesn't support anything. And that is completely trustworthy. By doing that, we become capable of navigating this human mind, this knowledge, this tendency of human beings to gather information and call it knowledge of good and evil. So that we can function right in all of that information without going insane, without becoming confused by it. Because we're in direct contact with this miraculous nature. that's unsupported. It doesn't even come into being, much less be destroyed. All of which is demonstrated here in this effort, this work that is done right now. In that way, we break through that shame. We break right through it. In order to break through it, we have to do the thing needed to break through it. So that when it comes down to it, we can be trusted. Because we've turned the whole world upside down by making the world secondary and this mind, this action right now, primary. Finally, then, it all makes sense. This isn't some kind of solipsism. It's about that is how relationships, true friendship forms. It isn't a philosophical position. It's a practice. It's an act. It is will, striving, vigor, effort, command, direction. That we get to the point when we can directly experience a deeper, more positive, more beneficial state, and we know exactly how to stabilize it. And we stay with it. We stay with it. We know exactly how to prevent its loss, and we stay with it, and we stay with it. We know exactly how to augment it, and we stay with it, and we stay with it. We know how to produce it and increase the production of it, and we stay with it, and we stay with it. We know how to cultivate it, and we stay with it, and we stay with it, until we come to the point of complete fulfillment of it. And the complete fulfillment of it is this fulfillment of right effort. This doing that culminates, that is fulfilled, that is consummated in non-doing, in complete non-doing. And in this way, you could say, return to the garden without needing to work for our nourishment anymore, without needing to go through this suffering anymore. This is the great power offered to us in this path. There is still time in this awakening period. Your sanity is needed. Your sanity is needed in the world right now. The world is in crisis. And it's in crisis because of the activity, the work of the human mind. Directly encounter samadhi, going beyond good and evil, going beyond understanding and not understanding. From there, breakthrough, of course. All of that's done through this miracle of being able to take action right now. In that we gain confidence and we directly confirm our power, leading us to knowing with certainty our true nature. Do this work and rejoice in it. Rejoice in it that we have this ability. Celebrate it and bring it to complete fulfillment for the benefit of the world. Here we are together. Here we are, we made it. From our heavenly realm to this earthly sphere, we've arrived. we're doing this work. We're offering it to the world. Again, it's okay to rejoice. It's okay to celebrate that we're here together doing this, that we're giving this great gift due to the power of our vows. This effort has brought us here. The effort has brought us here now, together. So, let us rejoice in that.